Hello lovely people, I'm Catherine and welcome to this week's video for the coverlet of comfort, carrying on with our theme for September of light and shade. And I've just set up here ready to start videoing, and I noticed that I've got the sun coming in here onto my piece. So yeah, light and shade, but I think that might be a little bit annoying to leave it like that during the video, so I am going to just pull the curtain across, but I just wanted you to see that, and then I'll sit down. Okay, so I basted my piece onto my backing. I'll show you on the back. I just did a line through the middle and a line down each side basically. There was a couple of questions about, because I've gone right up to the edge. I didn't need to go right up to the edge. It'll either get trimmed or turned under or whatever, because my backing is an inch bigger, you know, but one way or another it'll work out. Your size obviously is different to mine, so as long as your top piece is big enough to go where you want it to go, with maybe an inch extra if you want to turn in a seam when you join, and then the backing piece is a little bit bigger again, but everything works out one way or another. Sorry. Okay, so for this week we're going to do some appliqué like I mentioned last week, and to me light and shade, I've been thinking about it, is kind of, you can't have one without the other. You know, without light there would be no shade, would there? Literally there would be no shadow, because you need the light to cast the shadow. But it's also that kind of the contrast, you know, I guess the yin-yang or whatever, that one thing throws the other into relief and makes it visible. Does that make any sense at all? So in that whole idea of things feeding off each other, and mutuality, which was the theme of my Monday journaling video, what says that to me more than anything are circles. There's something about the circle shape. I know many of us love a circle. So what I've come up with is, I shall put the coverlet to one side for now, the actual piece, because we don't need that straight away. I've taken my pile of leftover scraps, and this is an offcut, so that'll give you a clue maybe. And I have been piecing scraps together, a light scrap and a dark scrap, and then cutting them out, and I've made these little circles of light and shade, which we can then appliqué on, and that is how you say it when you're me or any other British person. We can then appliqué them onto the piece, and I'll show you later how I might lay those out. So I've made a few. I've gone with 3 different sizes because I like threes of things. So I've gone with an egg cup, and basically go around your house looking for circle shaped things, unless you have fancy templates. An egg cup, lid off a little tin that had tea in it that sits on my desk with bits and bobs in, and another slightly bigger tin lid from a tin that I've got in the kitchen with actually Paxo stuffing in, which is for my daughter Lily when she comes, because she loves Paxo stuffing. So I chose those 3 different sizes. It doesn't really matter what size you use, you know, within reason, as long as they fit on your circle. I wouldn't go too small and fiddly. So let's put these to one side, and then I can show you how I went about it. So I've got 2 scraps here. So obviously take a light and a shade. You see those are all half and half of your pile of scraps that I ask you to keep out and not throw back in your scraps. Hopefully you remembered to do that, otherwise you're going to have to go scrap diving. So I've got 2 pieces here that are more or less the same size. It doesn't have to be exact. And I'm going to put them right sides together. And that's not the right thread. Get my piecing thread. I'm just using this Drimmer cotton, but you know, any cotton piecing thread. I've got a knot, but it doesn't really matter because we'll be cutting it. And then I'm going to stitch a seam along there, somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 inch. It doesn't matter. But I'm going to use, actually let's do it on the blue side, you maybe can see it better. I'm going to use what's called a locking back stitch when you're piecing. So I just take a little stitch to start me off and get my knot in there. Now I'll zoom you in, but you take a stitch, and then you go in the cloth just behind where you came out. It's kind of like you're about to do the invisible base, so you go in just behind where you came out, and then you go forward for 2 running stitches, and just as small as you can. And then again you go just behind where you came out, maybe by about 3 or 4 threads of the cloth, and then forward for 2. Behind and forward. So it actually takes no more time than doing regular running stitch, but you're putting in that little back stitch every 2 stitches, which just helps lock the threads in place. So then when you cut somewhere along that seam, which we'll inevitably do when we cut out our circles, it will hold better than if you'd just done a running stitch. I won't say it will hold completely, but we're going to applique them on and do all kinds of fancy stitching over them, so it will be good enough. And that in piecing is what is known as a locking back stitch, or also known as 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I think Jude Hill calls it that. She always comes up with great names for things. Jude Hill Spirit Cloth. So I'm just going to do that all the way along the 2 pieces of my scrap. Of my scraps, plural, sorry. And then when I come to the end, I'm going to open that up. And I want this to lay as flat as possible. I want it to resemble one piece of cloth as much as I can. So what I do is I'm just pulling that apart with my fingers and just finger pressing it one way. And once I've got it going one way, I can get my thumb in there and press it open with my fingers. I did so much ironing last week. I did enough ironing to last me the rest of the year. So this is finger pressing is good enough. But obviously if you want to go and put an iron on it, or you have a little handy dandy iron next to you where you work, you go for it, but it's not really necessary. And then with a little scrap like this, I don't think I need to pin, so I'm going to just go through with my thread to the front of my work. Same thread, it's a neutral thread. Make sure those seams are open, just hold them there with my finger and my thumb. And then on the front, get out of the way so that people can see, just sort of somewhere down the middle of that seam, I'm going to do invisible base. So a tiny back stitch and then forward for about 1/2 inch. Tiny back stitch forward, and I'm going to do that all the way along this seam and then all the way back up the other seam. So I finished one seam and my thread ran out, so I've just got a new bit of thread. And then I'll just do the same. This other seam is quite scant, so I'm going to have to just make sure that I trap it down. This isn't strictly necessary. If you've ironed it, it probably will stay flat. I would rather do this than iron. So it's up to you really. I just think it creates, like I said, more akin to one piece of cloth. And then it's just nicer to work with. Plus, I love the process of doing this. So this morning was a beautiful morning, or it is still a beautiful morning. It's actually Monday, because I think there might be quite a lot of stitching for me to do off camera to get it up to the stage I want to get it at, to show it to you at the end of the video. That was a long sentence, take a breath. But when we woke up this morning, it was so beautiful. I felt like going for, I mean, I walk here locally, you know, just out of the park where I live and into the local woodland or up the lane or whatever. But I felt like going to this other little bit of woodland that's about a 5-minute drive away, and it's just beautiful there. And you can see, on a clear day, you can see to Glastonbury Tor, which I could. I've taken you there before in a Park Home Life episode. So Stella and I went there and had a little walk. And it's good for me as well because it's quite uphill and down dale, so it's a little bit of a workout. Stella likes it because there's lots of squirrels, but I do keep her on her extending lead. There was one little squirrel, he ran up a tree when he saw us coming, and then he was sort of halfway up the trunk and he was really telling us off. It was quite funny. Right, so I've done both those. So you see how now it's this one flat, lovely piece of cloth. Almost, and especially since I've used the thin cotton, you know, soft, thinnish cotton, even where that seam is, obviously you've got the double layer, but it's really nice and flat. So then the next thing I'm going to do is get my template. Actually, I might move my felt pad away. I think it's easier to draw on my desk. And I'm going to turn it over to the wrong side, and I've just got this normal, it's just a normal pencil, but it's a soft one with a nice sharp point, and my template. And now you can decide here if I show you these ones that I've already cut out, you see that one I've got it kind of half and half-ish. That one I've got more blue than cream. That one's also maybe slightly more blue but kind of half and half. That one's definitely less blue. That one's significantly more cream, and that one's significantly more blue. So you can play with that. And also if you had, you know, little scraps that were only a certain thickness, that might inform, you know, where you can put your template. So don't be afraid of using quite narrow scraps, as long as you've got enough for a seam, plus, you know, a bit extra. Like this here, this scrap was maybe 1.5 inches wide, and that was enough to provide that. But I've got here, I can choose. So I think I'm just kind of looking how much I've got showing of each. I probably will want to make a few more as well. So let's go for just off centre, but just slightly more towards the light. So I'll just put that on, make sure it's within all that stitching that I did, and hold it firmly, and then with my pencil, and if I push down really firmly, the cloth won't move. When I come to the seam, I go with the seam, if that makes sense, so that I don't, you know, ruckle the seam up with the pencil. Try not to get my head anyway. If you've got fancy marking tools, you know, those disappearing pens and all that, and you prefer to use those, you can. But I find a good soft pencil, but really sharp, works the best on all but the darkest cloths, and then you might need to use something else. Maybe if you've got a white pencil or a light coloured colouring pencil, that might work. Okay, so there's my circle. So now I need to cut it out, and the best way to cut out neatly is to come in kind of at an angle. Don't cut in like that and then have to turn. You come in at an angle, and then when you get to where your line is, keep the blade of the scissors, keep it right into the mouth of the scissors, so you're using the full extent of the blade. And then turn the cloth. It's hard for me to do without getting my head in your way, but you turn the piece that you're cutting and just keep cutting. Get back to the mouth, right in the mouth. You know what I mean by the mouth of the scissors. I don't know if that's the correct term. Just be a little bit careful going over the seam, but and just do the best you can. If they come out a bit wibbly wobbly and wonky, you can always put some stitching over it if you don't like the look of it, or you can just embrace the wonkiness if you're happy to do that, or you could couch something down. You know, there's all kinds of things you can do. Just do the best you can. So then when I come back to the beginning, I just keep cutting, and I sort of keep cutting past. Do you see how it fell off, but I just kept going, and then you don't get that little nick where you stop start. So now I've got this piece that I can just probably pull apart, and that can go back in the scraps. If you get bigger pieces joined together left over, I put them in the scraps like that, because that's a little element that you could then use in a meditation scroll, or, you know, any other slow stitch piece. You've already got a little element made. So, but you know, that's just me. You can also pull them apart. So there we go. So I've now got 7 of these little circles. So let's have a look at how we might position them on the piece. I was going to talk more about walking in the woods, but I need to tell you things at the moment, so I'll come back to that. So you have a look at your piece. No, I can't get all mine in, but you'll get the idea. So, excuse me. There's different ways that you could lay them on. You could, I'll do it with a big one so you can see. You could put them so the light goes on a dark patch and the dark goes on a light patch, like that. I might be a little bit wary of putting the seam over the seam, but you could do that. You could turn it through 90 degrees so that it crossed, and you can do a combination of all these things, of course. You could put it off centre, either that way or maybe that way, maybe on a bigger patch. You could put them on an angle. You know, the world's your oyster. The possibilities are not endless, but there's a lot of them. So I would say when you've made a few, have a little play with where you might want to put them, bearing in mind always to stay an inch away from the edge, kind of thing. because of the joining. So just have a little play about, which is what I'm going to do now. You could even, like here, I've covered that corner. You could even, I keep saying you could even, put them, like here is this cloth, although actually I used it the right way up here and there I'd used it back to front, but it doesn't matter. I could play with that, although that's bringing it a bit near the edge, but or maybe up there. Maybe even cloth on cloth gives an interesting effect. Do you see what I mean? So it's almost blending into itself. Let's find this one here is the same as this cloth. So I don't think I'd do it like that because that's a bit pointless. But if you did it kind of, so part of it's on, part of it's off, or the other way around. So that almost looks like a little half circle of this has jumped out. In fact, I like that. And I think, I'll just move it down slightly and over slightly. I think I'm happy with that there. So that's going to get pinned. Just with a little appliqué pin, that's what they're for. So I'm going to have a play about with the others and put them on, and then I'll finish talking about what I was talking about. So yeah, I was walking in the woods, and like I said, it's a beautiful morning. Someone taking their bin in, as you know, it's Monday and it's bin day. I don't think I'm going to do that everywhere. Sorry, off on another tangent. I don't think I'm going to do that everywhere. I think that would be getting a bit obvious, but you could if you like that as a theme, you know, having the half circle jumping out. Yeah, not sure about that. No, I'm not putting that one there. Yeah, get on with it, Catherine. So I was walking in the woods and looking at the plants. It's a tiny little patch of woodland. You can, well, there's two patches either side of the lane. If you saw that video where I shared it with you, you'll have seen. And we just walk round the one half. I think I'm going to put that like that. So I park up in that little quarry where, if you've watched that video, you'll have seen me parking. I'm going to turn that the other way up actually, don't know why, I think. No, happy the first time. And we just walked around the first bit, which is I like the other bit. The other bit's very, very, well, it's not long. It takes maybe half an hour to walk around the first bit. The second bit's maybe another hour on top of that. And I knew I had to come back and do this. And I just need to check that is, if things are supposed to be, it's not purple, but we're going to say it anyway, purpledicular, then we want them to be purpledicular and not on the wonk. I might put some wonky, I don't know yet. Yeah, and it's for such a small patch, I've pinned it to the mat, for such a small patch of woodland, it's got so much variety of landscapes in it, you know, where you go in it's very narrow and lots of damp and bosky, that's the woodland word, very bosky, and there's lots of ferns growing and shade, you know. I was thinking about doing this, so I was thinking about light and shade. I quite like that there, because that's not that cloth, but it's close enough. And actually that is over seams, but I think it'll be fine because it's also soft and thin, the cloth. Do I want things on the wonk? Sometimes you feel like it, sometimes I don't think I do, you know. I don't think I feel like wonky today. I'm not intentionally wonky, but you do you if you want to do wonky. It's just whatever you like the look of. Yeah, so you walk up this little narrow path through this really damp, shady area, and there's all ferns growing and little ground cover plants that grow in the shade, and it's very cool. I mean, it's not the warmest of mornings, it's getting decidedly autumnal, but in the deep shade there I was glad I'd put a cardigan on. And then you come up and it's quite a steep up. I was huffing and puffing a bit when I came to the top. Towards the top, which is kind of faces southeast, and so the rising sun, well, the sun was risen but it was still quite low, was right in my eyes as I came up the top of the hill. And so, you know, into sunlight, as much sunlight as you can when there's trees, but you see the sun coming through the trees, and how the patches of ground where the sun is hitting them, although you know it's the same plants and the same understory as there is where the shade is, but how that changes the look of even it changes the colours. I mean, light is colour, isn't it? Light is colour is, sorry, part of the visible spectrum of light that we call colour. Sorry, brief pause while I concentrated for a second. So, you know, it even changes the colour, so there would be patches of hard shield fern, for example, on the edge of the shady area, and then that looked quite a deep shade of green, but then where the sun was hitting them they were almost yellow. And thinking about how light and shade changes our perceptions of things. Stella's snoring. She doesn't care. She just had a lovely walk in the woods. She thinks all this is nonsense. Quite like that. I'm looking how that's taking a little quadrant off this piece, and I'm quite liking the effect of that. So I was pondering on all those things as I was walking. And then you come out into this completely open area where I had a little mild rant to myself, where I'll tell you why in a minute, where there's mostly bracken and some very young trees growing and brambles, and then there's the little path carries on, and then there's a bench where I've sat with you. I've shown you the bench, I think, even. Yeah, what was I having a rant about? They have... Isn't that going to chime 11? I don't know why I tell you how many it's going to chime. You can count if you want to. Yeah, they had planted some saplings, which is lovely, in this open area. But they had cleared a great big, you know, so for one sapling they'd maybe cleared 4 or 5, and it's the Woodland Trust, I suppose I shouldn't criticise them. I suppose they know what they're doing, maybe better than me, but anyway, but they cleared, excuse me, a big, more than they would have need to have cleared just for the access of just getting in there. Do I want this one just slap bang in the middle of that like that? I don't think I do. I don't think I want it bang in the middle. I think I prefer them more off-centre. You know, more than they needed to. Just, it wasn't that they just trampled it down to get there to put the tree in place. And maybe there's a reason for this that I don't know. Okay, so then they planted the sapling, they'd staked it, excuse me, and they put one of those plastic sleeves over it to stop the deer from eating it. Okay, and there was a few places like that where that had been done. Now, here's something I observed when I was living in France. Oh, just, and yeah, and in other areas of this quite large area of bramble and bracken, there were self-sown trees growing quite happily, with the bramble and bracken all around them, protecting them from the deer. Now, when I first moved to the house in France that I left last year, 8 years ago now, 8.5 years ago, there was, at the back of the field where my horses eventually went, there was quite a steep bank going down, and at the bottom was a little stream, and in there was this valley, which we called the Secret Valley, because when you stood on the field not very far away at all, I'm just thinking that's fun to line the checks up with the checks, like that. Just playing now. And before we bought the house, the neighbour had his cows on this field, and there was no fence, and obviously he let them go down to the stream. Now, I didn't want my horses to go down there because it was quite steep and muddy, and I was worried for them, you know, if they went racing or whatever. And also, my boy Balder had sweet itch, and down there, with it being in the valley and shady, there was a lot of biting insects, which is what sets off the Slowstitch. So yeah, I think I'm going to do that. So I put the fence along the top of the bank so that the horses couldn't go down there, okay? And then for a long time we couldn't really walk there easily. Well, you could, but you had to duck under the electric fence, having made sure that you'd turned it off at the top. Otherwise you'd have had to go all the way back up to do it. And it's quite a long way up and a steep hill. And then fight your way through the broom and the bracken and the brambles and everything else that grew up. So we didn't really go there because I used to go to our woods from the other side. So I'd walk around the lane to the back of the woods where there was a big field behind, and I'd come into our woods from that way. And then a few years later, we were offered the opportunity by a neighbour to buy another little strip of woodland, very cheap, I mean ridiculously cheap, that kind of was between our garden and our existing woodland. So that meant that I could create some paths through there. I followed the animal tracks, I did a bit of gentle pruning here and there, but I created a path through there that led right down into the secret valley. And it took me quite a long time because there was quite a lot of bramble and, you know, whatever. It took me a good couple of weeks maybe. But the day that I actually got down there and came into the secret valley through a place that we called the Wallows because Wild Boar had made a wallow, the secret valley, I didn't recognise it, and I think it was maybe left for 3 or 4 years, 3.5 years, something like that, 3.5 years. I didn't recognise it. It had completely grown up, yes, with bracken and brambles and all that kind of thing, nettles, but also trees, saplings, ash trees, birch trees, alders. There was 2 or 3 large alders growing right by the side of the stream. There was the grandmother, the daughter, and the granddaughter, I called them. But just a little bit further on, where it had been, where the cattle had been, and bearing in mind it wasn't a big herd, I think he had maybe 6 or 8 cows, not very many. He was a retired farmer and he just kept a few. Where the cattle had been, it was like a ford, you know, it was really shallow and muddy, and well, the stream was fast flowing and clear, and that little area was completely growing with alders and all kinds of other wildflowers and plants. And looking at those trees, not those alders necessarily, but the other trees in amongst all the bracken and the bramble and the rest of it, it occurred to me for the first time in my life that the bracken and the bramble is nature's deer protectors, because there was a lot of deer where I never went a day without seeing at least 2 or 3 deer. There were loads of deer around, but those saplings were growing unmolested in amongst all that. So this morning when I was, sorry, carry on working, Catherine. This morning when I was sitting on that little bench looking at that, I was just reflecting on why do they clear all that, the nature's defences, and they provided a lovely big clear area where the deer can walk right in unmolested, and then they put a plastic tree protector over it. If you work for the Woodland Trust, or you know why they would do that, and not just do the minimal of disturbance, plant the sapling and leave it, I don't know. So that got me wondering. My suspicion is they do it like that because that's how they've always done it. Quite like that there. And actually, I think I will make a few more. I'm going to pin that one on there. I'm going to stitch one on just to do that with you and stop ranting about woodland management. I'm not really ranting, as always, I'm perfectly happy to be corrected. I'm just saying what I observed in my woods in France, which is, my minimal experience of woodland management, and also what I've read in books, what Dr. Simard talks about in Finding the Mother Tree, for example, which I'm rereading, about, large-scale industrial forestry management for commerce, and how she's made it her life's work to try and change how that is done, where the monocultures where they clear everything and plant crop trees, and how she's proven through her work that actually trees do better in the company of other trees and other plants and not as a monoculture. You know, from a commercial point of view, they do better. I mean, obviously they do better from nature's point of view. Anyway, stop ranting, Catherine. So, so there we go. So I've pinned all those on because I'm getting a bit agitated. I've pinned all those on. I think I'm happy with it. Another tip, if you're doing sort of layouts like this, is to pin it up, so pin it to a curtain or something and look at it vertically if you're worried. You could also, of course, just stitch one on, stitch the next one on and not do the layout. I don't know why I was doing a layout, it just seemed to be what I was doing while I was rambling on about tree planting. So I think I'm going to do all kinds of different stitching on this. Of course we are, of course we are. So I think meanwhile I'm just going to baste these on using the invisible baste or just a running stitch. Let's just do one. Let's do this little one here. So you could use invisible, but I think I'm just going to do a running stitch maybe, because my thread is very neutral. No, I'm going to invisible baste. Make your mind up. I'm going to do invisible baste maybe somewhere between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, because I don't yet know how I'm going to stitch these down. All different ways, I would imagine. Oh, I did want to say about the raw edges. I think most of you by now are no longer worried about raw edges, if you ever were. I need to turn it, sorry. If you really didn't like the idea of raw edge applique, you could of course create these little pieces of cloth and then get a circle of cardboard and cut your circle about 1/4 of an inch bigger all around, and then do the method that we used last year. I'll try and remember to link the video. It's when we made the little fabric box with circles on, and we did a running stitch around the edge of the piece of cloth for the circle, put the template in, pulled the running stitch up, you know, like a, what do they call that? A gathering stitch. Thank you brain. A gathering stitch, and then you take the cardboard out and then you've got your circle with a turned edge. That's another way you can do it. I'm not a huge fan of that because I can never get them, that's just me, I can never get them the edge as smooth as I like, and you would of course have to be especially careful where your seam was. But if you really fancy that, I would say just try one and see how it works out. And if it doesn't and you want to go back to raw edge, you can, you know, obviously just do that. But I think raw edge is fine. Another solution would be to couch something over your raw edge if you weren't happy. You know, you could now tack it down like this and then just couch something, and I might do some couching. Don't know yet, that'll be next week. But I think it's a nice thing to just get them all couched on, all stitched on, and then you've got your one cloth already. This is how I like to work anyway, with everything on, and then I can just go and sit with it and do my fancy stitching, and obviously I'll share some of that process with you. So I'm back round to the beginning, just go through to the back, get the pin away, and do a little back stitch. Buried my scissors. Where have they gone? Where have they gone? Nobody leave. My snippies, where are they? Oh, there they are. There they are. Sorry. I'll just cut that off. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, baste all those on, and then I'm going to take a view if I need to do any more circles. And when I've done all that, I shall come back and show you. That might be tomorrow, because I've got, this Friday I'm going on my stitching retreat. So when you see this on Wednesday, I'll have 2 more sleeps. Yay! So I've got stuff to prepare for that. I'm making little gifts to take for everybody that I have to do, finish up with. I obviously have to pack my things. I have to pack Stella's things because she's going to stay with my lovely friend Rosie for the weekend. And I've got to make sure there's food enough to leave for Friday. You know, all the stuff you have to do when you go away. It's only for 3 days, but still. So I've got quite a busy week with all that, and I'm excited, so that's made me a bit ooh. So yeah, anyway, I don't know why I'm telling you all that. This is a very wittery video, but you don't mind me wittering. 50,000 of you apparently don't mind me wittering. 50,000 plus, yes. I told that story on Monday of how I've tipped the 50. Oh, just a quick word as well. On Friday, there's a Park Home Life, and I've already filmed it. Now, I filmed it yesterday, which was the day of the week anniversary of a year. I mean, the date was today, but the day of the week was the Sunday that I moved in, and plus it was a nice day yesterday, and so I went to the beach. No, was it? Yeah. Anyway, so I went to the same beach that I went on the first episode of Park Home Life, and I'm going to share that with you tomorrow. And I didn't know at that point that I was going to hit the 50,000, so I didn't mention it. I witter on about all kinds of other stuff, of course. It was very, very windy, so I couldn't film a lot on the beach. Well, I could, but you wouldn't have heard me. But anyway, so I hope you enjoy that on Friday. Catherine, stop, go and have a cup of tea. I'm going to go and have a cup of tea, finish stitching these on, make some more, and then I'll be back when I've calmed down a bit. Okay, so there we are. I've done 11 circles in the end. I did that, like I said. I think I've actually got it the other way up, but I'll decide. I don't have to decide which way up it goes until I actually attach it to the coverlet. I made this one extra, and this one, and this one, and this one, I think those were the 4 I did extra, and I've kind of kept them either going parallel or perpendicular. I didn't go wonky in the end, and I've just played about till I was happy. And like I said, I pinned it up to the curtain at one point and stood back and looked at it and saw where I thought it needed some more circles. Here again I did that. Did I do that with you? That jumping out of there. I mean, this is the same cloth as this. This is the same cloth as this. So you can either say, well, you don't want the same cloths near each other, or you can play with it like that. Oh, and yes, and here, these 2 circles, the light sides are the same cloth, but I've got one this way and one that way, and slightly offset, because I just like the look of that as well. So yeah, so it's just playing with the concept of light and shade in these light and shadowy, shady circles. Shady circles, that sounds wrong. Let's not go into shady circles, shall we? Anyway, so I hope you enjoy doing that this week, and next week of course we will start some fancy stitching, I imagine. Don't know what yet. I've got a few ideas, but by next week I'll have them more sorted out, obviously, hopefully in a way that I can communicate with you. And I'm now going to go and have some lunch because it's quite late. It's nearly 2 o'clock. And I'm a bit hungry after my walk this morning. So happy stitching this week. Do look out for Friday's Park Home Life and Monday's journaling. I think on Monday for the journaling video I might do something. I'm not going to do a live. People have asked if I'm going to do a live to celebrate 50,000 subscribers. I'm not going to do that. I just don't, yeah, I'm just not going to at this moment. Maybe at some point in the future. But I think I might do something in my journal on Monday to celebrate the 50,000. So look out for that if you're interested. Have a lovely week. Happy stitching. Happy whatever you're doing. I hope you're all safe and well, and lots of love and kisses. And I'll see you next time. Bye bye.